The crystalline snow of Kythera fell in delicate spirals, each flake catching the pale light of the dying binary suns before settling on Zelana's silver skin. She pressed herself deeper into the alcove carved into the obsidian cliff face, her violet eyes tracking the last transport ship as it disappeared into the purple-tinged atmosphere. The low hum of its engines faded until only the whisper of wind through the crystal formations remained, 19 cycles old and already deemed unworthy of salvation. Zelana pulled her gossamer cloak tighter around her slender frame, though it provided little warmth against Kythera's increasingly frigid climate. The fabric, woven from rare shimmer silk, had been her mother's, one of the few possessions she'd been allowed to keep when the Council of Minds had pronounced their verdict. Empathically unstable, they had declared in their cold, harmonious voices, her abilities are too strong, too chaotic. She feels too deeply, thinks too emotionally. She would contaminate the pure telepathic network we must establish on our new world. The memory sent a shiver through Zelana that had nothing to do with the cold. In Kytherian society, emotional control was paramount. Their species had evolved beyond what they considered the primitive chaos of feelings, developing instead a refined telepathic communication system that required perfect mental discipline. Zelana's gift, or curse, as the Council saw it, allowed her to not only sense emotions, but to experience them with overwhelming intensity. When others felt joy, she was flooded with euphoria. When they experienced sorrow, she drowned in their despair. As a child, she had been unable to distinguish between her own emotions and those of others. The constant bombardment of feelings from every Kytherian around her had left her exhausted, unstable, often reduced to tears or fits of uncontrollable laughter. Her parents had tried everything: meditation sessions with the wisest elders, neural dampening treatments, even temporary isolation in the sensory void chambers deep beneath the capital city of Luminspire. Nothing had worked. The wind picked up, howling through the jagged peaks that surrounded her hiding place. Zelana had discovered this sheltered alcove during her childhood wanderings, when the overwhelming press of minds in the city became too much to bear. It was here she had learned to find peace, surrounded by the simple, wordless presence of Kytheris. Crystalline rock formations and the sparse, hardy plants that somehow thrived in the planet's harsh environment. Now, it would likely be her tomb. The evacuation had taken 3 full cycles to complete. Zelana had watched from a distance as her people, tall, graceful beings with skin that ranged from pale silver to deep platinum, warded the sleek vessels that would carry them to their new home in the Kepler system. She had seen her own parents among them, their faces carefully composed in the neutral expression that was considered proper for Kytherians. They hadn't even looked in her direction. The abandonment hurt more than the cold ever could. As the last light of the binary suns faded behind the crystal peaks, Zelana rose from her shelter and began the careful descent toward the valley floor. If she was going to die on this frozen world, she refused to do it cowering in a cave. She would face her fate with whatever dignity she could muster. The path down was treacherous, made more so by the gathering darkness and the ice that had begun to form on the rock surfaces. Zelana's feet, bare except for the thin slippers that were traditional Kytherian footwear, struggled for purchase on the slippery stone. More than once she had to pause, pressing herself against the cliff face as loose rocks skittered into the abyss below. By the time she reached the valley, her legs were shaking with exhaustion and cold. The temperature was dropping rapidly with the setting of the suns, and Zelana knew she had perhaps an hour before the night frost set in. On Kythera, night temperatures could plummet to levels that would freeze exposed flesh in minutes. She stumbled forward through the knee-deep snow, looking for any kind of shelter. The valley was dotted with the ruins of ancient Kytherian settlements, structures built from the same obsidian-like stone as the cliffs, their surfaces carved with intricate patterns that had once channeled and amplified telepathic energies. Most had been abandoned for centuries as her people migrated to the more advanced cities, but perhaps one might offer protection from the coming freeze. Zelana's empathic abilities, so reviled by her own people, had taught her to read the emotional. Resonance that lingered in places where strong feelings had once been experienced. As she approached the nearest ruin, she felt an unexpected warmth, not physical warmth, but the echo of love, of joy, of families who had once called this place home. The sensation was so different from the cold disapproval she had felt in Luminspire that it brought tears to her eyes. The structure was partially collapsed. Its roof caved in on one side, but the main chamber remained intact. Zelana pushed through the snow that had drifted against the entrance and stepped inside. The walls were covered in the traditional spiral patterns of her people, but these were different from the purely functional designs she was used to. These spirals incorporated flowing, organic shapes that seemed to dance in the dim light, filtering through gaps in the ceiling. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal made from pure crystal, its surface smooth and clear as still water. Zelana approached it cautiously, her empathic senses tingling with recognition. This had been a heart shrine, a place where ancient Kitherians had come not to suppress their emotions, but to celebrate them. Such shrines had been banned for over 1,000 years, deemed primitive and chaotic by the ruling telepathic elite. As Zelana placed her palm against the crystal surface, she gasped. The stone was warm to the touch, and suddenly her mind was flooded with sensations, not the overwhelming chaos she usually experienced, but something focused and pure. Love. Deep, abiding love between partners who had pledged themselves to each other before this very shrine. Joy at the birth of children. Grief at the passing of elders, but grief tempered by gratitude for lives well lived. All the emotions her people now considered weakness, preserved here in crystalline memory. For the first time in her life, Zelana felt truly at peace with her gift. She sank to her knees beside the pedestal, overwhelmed not by chaos, but by harmony. Perhaps her abilities weren't a defect after all. Perhaps they were simply a connection to what her people had once been, before they decided that feelings were flaws to be eliminated rather than treasures to be cherished. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and the temperature continued to drop. But inside the heart shrine, surrounded by the warm echoes of love and acceptance, Zelana no longer felt afraid. If this was to be her end, at least she would meet it in a place where her true nature was not seen as a curse. She closed her eyes and let the crystal's ancient warmth flow through her, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of Kitherians who had not been afraid to feel. Marcus Rivera's hands flew over the control panel as the Stellar Wanderer shuddered violently around him. Warning lights bathed the cockpit in angry red, and the ship's automated voice kept repeating the same dire message. Hull breach detected. Atmospheric entry trajectory compromised. Emergency landing protocols engaged. Not exactly the scenic route I had in mind, Marcus muttered through gritted teeth, fighting to maintain control as the cargo vessel plummeted through Kitharus. Purple-tinged atmosphere. What had started as a routine supply run to the outer colonies had turned into a nightmare when they'd encountered an unexpected meteor storm in the system's outer reaches. The 24-year-old pilot had been flying cargo routes for 3 years since graduating from the Terran Space Academy, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this. Chunks of ice and rock the size of shuttlecraft had torn through the Wanderer's shielding like tissue paper, leaving gaping holes in the hull and crippling most of their systems. Marcus. Naya Blackwood's voice crackled through the intercom. From the passenger cabin. The atmospheric readings are showing we're approaching an inhabited system, but the planet below looks mostly frozen. Are you sure this is our best option? Unless you've got a miracle repair kit hidden somewhere, it's our only option, Marcus called back, His dark eyes focused on the rapidly approaching surface. The planet stretched out below them, a world of crystalline peaks and frozen valleys that glittered like scattered diamonds under the light of twin suns. Behind him, he could hear the other survivors moving around the cabin, securing loose equipment and preparing for what would either be a rough landing or a spectacular crash. Besides Naya, the ship's xenobiologist, there were 3 others: Joran, Voss, their communications specialist, Elena Santos, a terraforming engineer, and old Ben Murphy, a veteran spacer who'd been hitching a ride back to Earth after finishing his contract on Titan Station. The Wanderer hit the upper atmosphere with a bone-jarring impact that made Marcus's teeth clatter. The ship's heat shields were damaged, and he could feel the hull temperature rising as they descended. Through the viewports, he watched streams of superheated plasma flow past like liquid fire. "Come on, baby," Marcus whispered to his ship, coaxing every bit of performance from the damaged engines. "Just get us down in one piece. That's all I ask." The surface rushed up to meet them with alarming speed. Marcus could make out details now. Vast crystalline formations jutting from the ground like frozen trees, and what looked like ruins scattered throughout the valleys. The planet seemed eerily beautiful and completely lifeless. "Brace for impact," Marcus shouted into the intercom as he spotted a relatively flat stretch of ground between 2 towering crystal spires. He fired the remaining thrusters in a desperate attempt to slow their descent, but the Wanderer was coming in too fast and too steep. The ship hit the frozen ground with tremendous force, bouncing once before sliding sideways through the snow. And ice! The sound of tearing metal filled Marcus's ears as the hull scraped against hidden rocks. The cockpit viewport cracked, spider-webbing across his field of vision, and then everything went black. Marcus awoke to the taste of blood in his mouth and the acrid smell of burning electronics. His head throbbed, and when he touched his forehead, his fingers came away sticky with blood from a gash above his left eyebrow. The cockpit was tilted at an odd angle, and through the damaged viewport, he could see they'd come to rest against a massive outcropping of black stone. "Status report," he called out groggy, struggling to unbuckle his safety harness. "We're alive," came Naya's shaky voice from the cabin. "Mostly. Ben's got a broken arm, and Elena's unconscious, but she's breathing. Joran's trying to get the emergency systems online." Marcus forced himself to stand, ignoring the dizziness that threatened to send him tumbling. The ship was a wreck. Sparks showered from exposed conduits, and several hull plates had buckled inward from the impact. But they were alive, and that was more than he'd dared hope for during those final terrifying moments of the crash. He made his way back to the passenger cabin, stepping carefully over debris and broken equipment. Naya knelt beside Elena, checking, her pulse with the focused attention that made her such a good scientist. Her short auburn hair was mussed, and there was a bruise forming on her left cheek, but her green eyes were alert and determined. "How bad is she?" Marcus asked, crouching beside them. "Concussion, I think. Her pupils are responsive, but she needs to be kept warm and monitored." Naya looked up at him with worry creasing her features. "Marcus, the environmental readings I'm getting. This planet is much colder than Earth standard. And it's getting worse. The temperature outside is dropping fast." Across the cabin, Joran looked up from the communications console he'd been frantically working on. The lean communications specialist's usually neat blonde hair was disheveled, and his wire-rimmed glasses sat crooked on his nose. "I've got bad news. The main comm array was sheared off during the crash. I can get short-range communications working, maybe a few kilometers, but we can't contact Earth or the nearest outpost." Old Ben Murphy, cradling his broken arm against his chest, grimaced as he tried to sit up straighter. "Well, that's just perfect. Stranded on a frozen rock in the middle of nowhere." Despite his gruff words, Marcus could see the worry in the veteran spacer's weathered features. "We'll figure it out," Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. "First priority is shelter and warmth. The ship's heating system is damaged, and according to Naya, the temperature outside is dropping fast. We need to assess what supplies we can salvage and find a way to improve our shelter." Over the next hour, they took inventory of their situation. The crash had destroyed most of their long-term supplies, but they had emergency rations for about 2 weeks, basic medical supplies, and several portable heating units that had survived the impact. Most importantly, they had Naya's scientific equipment, which included atmospheric analyzers and biological scanners. "The air outside is breathable," Naya reported, studying her readings. "Oxygen content is actually a bit higher than Earth standard, though there are some trace gases I can't identify. But the temperature ... She shook her head. "It's already dropped to -20 Celsius, and the readings suggest it'll get much worse after dark." "What about those ruins we saw during the descent?" Marcus asked. "Could they provide better shelter than the ship?" Naya consulted her scanners again. "There's definitely artificial structures out there. The closest one is about half a kilometer to the north. But Marcus ... She hesitated. "I'm also picking up what might be a life sign. Very faint, and the readings are strange, but there might be someone or something alive out there." The group exchanged glances. The possibility of finding local inhabitants was both hopeful and terrifying. They had no idea if the planet's residents would be friendly, hostile, or something else entirely. "We should investigate," Marcus decided. "If there's someone out there, they might be able to help us. And if those ruins can provide better shelter than our wreck of a ship, we need to know." As they prepared to venture outside, Marcus found himself thinking about the strange beauty he'd glimpsed during their descent. This frozen world seemed almost magical, with its crystalline formations and mysterious ruins. He wondered what kind of beings had once lived here, and if any still remained. The airlock hissed as it cycled, and Marcus stepped out onto the alien surface for the first time. The cold hit him like a physical blow, even through his environmental suit. The snow crunched under his boots, and his breath formed clouds of vapor that froze almost instantly in the frigid air. But despite the harsh conditions, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at the landscape around them. The crystal formations caught and refracted the light of the twin suns, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the snow. In the distance, the dark ruins stood silhouetted against the pale sky like ancient sentinels keeping watch over a forgotten world. "It's beautiful," Naya whispered beside him, her voice filled with wonder despite their desperate situation. Marcus nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of destiny as they began their trek toward the ruins. He had no idea that with each step through the frozen landscape, he was walking toward a meeting that would change his life forever. The life sign Naya had detected was growing stronger, and somewhere in those ancient ruins, a young woman with young, silver skin and violet eyes was about to discover that she was no longer alone in the universe. Naya Blackwood had always believed that the universe held wonders beyond imagination, but nothing had prepared her for the moment she first laid eyes on Zelana emerging from the ancient heart shrine. The xenobiologist's breath caught in her throat as she watched the graceful figure step into the pale light of Kithera's twin suns, her silver skin seeming to glow from within, and her violet eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Marcus," Naya whispered, barely able to speak above the wind that howled through the crystalline formations surrounding them. "I don't think we're the only survivors on this planet." The human crew had been trudging through the knee-deep snow for nearly an hour, following Naya's scanner readings toward the source of the mysterious life sign. Elena remained back at the crashed ship, still unconscious but stable, while Ben kept watch with his good arm. It was just Marcus, Naya, and Joran who witnessed this first contact with an alien being, Zelana stood frozen in the entrance of the shrine, her gossamer cloak fluttering in the bitter wind. Even from a distance, Naya could see the elegant bone structure, the elongated limbs, and the way the alien moved with an almost ethereal grace. But what struck her most was the overwhelming sense of loneliness that seemed to emanate from the figure, a loneliness so profound that it made Naya's chest ache with sympathy. "Is she dot?" Joran started to ask, his voice trembling slightly, as he adjusted his glasses with numb fingers. "Sentient," Marcus finished, his own voice filled with awe. "Definitely sentient." Naya watched as recognition dawned in those remarkable violet eyes. Zelana had seen them too. The alien took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, her hands clasped in front of her in what could only be a defensive posture. "She's afraid of us," Naya observed, her xenobiologist training kicking in despite the surreal nature of the situation. "Look at her body language, the way she's holding herself, the hesitation. She's curious but terrified." Marcus took a careful step forward, his hands visible and empty. "Can you blame her? We probably look as alien to her as she does to us." As if responding to his movement, Zelana called out something in a language that sounded like wind chimes mixed with flowing water. The words were completely foreign, but the tone was unmistakably a question, perhaps asking who they were or what they wanted. "I wish we could understand her," Joran muttered, fumbling with his damaged translation equipment. Nia's mind raced as she studied Zelana's appearance and behavior. The alien's features were humanoid, but refined to an almost artistic perfection. Her ears were slightly pointed, her limbs longer and more delicate than a human's. And there was something about her eyes, in depth and intensity, that suggested intelligence far beyond mere survival instinct. "Wait," Naya said suddenly, remembering something from her xenobiology studies. In first contact protocols, universal gestures are key. Most sentient species develop similar basic communication signs. She slowly raised her hand, palm out, in, the universal gesture of peaceful greeting. Zelana's eyes widened, and after a moment of hesitation, she raised her own hand in response. Her fingers were longer than a human's, with an extra joint that allowed for incredibly graceful movement, but the gesture was unmistakably the same. "She understands," Marcus breathed. "She knows we're trying to communicate peacefully." Encouraged by this success, Naya began a careful series of gestures, pointing to herself and saying, "Naya," then pointing to Marcus and Joran and giving their names. She hoped that basic linguistics would hold true, that even an alien language might follow similar patterns for personal identification. Zelana listened intently, her head tilted slightly to one side in a gesture that somehow looked both alien and endearingly familiar. Then, placing a graceful hand on her chest, she spoke a single word that sounded like silver bells. "Zelana." "Zelana," Naya repeated carefully, and was rewarded with what could only be described as a smile. It transformed the alien's face completely, chasing away the fear and loneliness, and replacing it with something that looked remarkably like hope. Over the next several minutes, they managed to establish basic communication through a combination of gestures, simple words, and what Naya could only describe as an almost telepathic understanding. Zelana seemed to grasp concepts with unusual speed, as if she could sense the intentions behind their words, even when she didn't understand the language itself. The turning point came when the wind suddenly picked up, sending a cascade of ice, crystals swirling around them. Joran stumbled, his injured balance making it difficult to stay upright in the treacherous conditions. Without hesitation, Zelana rushed forward, her alien grace allowing her to move easily through the deep snow, and caught him before he could fall. As their hands touched, something extraordinary happened. Joran's eyes went wide, and he gasped as if he'd been struck by lightning. "I can ... I can feel what she's feeling," he stammered. "She's not just helping me. She's experiencing my pain, my fear, everything. Zelana released him quickly, stepping back with what looked like embarrassment or shame coloring her silver features. She spoke rapidly in her musical language, gesturing apologetically. She's empathic, Naya realized with growing excitement. That's why she understood us so quickly. She can literally feel our emotions and intentions. It's an incredible gift. But as Naya watched Zelana's reaction to Joran's shock, she began to understand something else. The alien wasn't just empathic. She was struggling with her abilities, as if they were both a blessing and a curse. Marcus seemed to sense this too. He approached Zelana slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening. When he was close enough, he gently touched his own chest and said, "Thank you." The words were simple, but his tone carried genuine gratitude and acceptance. Zelana's violet eyes filled with what were unmistakably tears. She spoke a single word that needed no translation. Gratitude, relief, and joy all conveyed in the musical syllables of her native tongue. As the storm continued to build around them, it became clear that they needed shelter immediately. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and even in their environmental suits, the humans were beginning to suffer from the cold. Zelana seemed to understand their predicament without explanation. She gestured toward the shrine behind her, speaking urgently in her own language, while making universal signs for shelter and warmth. The interior of the heart shrine took Naya's breath away. The walls were covered in intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, and the central crystal pedestal radiated a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with emotional resonance. "This place," Naya whispered, running her hands over the carved walls. "It's not just architecture, it's art. It's a celebration of feeling itself." Zelana nodded eagerly, and through a combination of gestures and her empathic abilities, she began to explain the shrine's purpose. Naya found herself understanding not just the words, but the deeper meaning behind them. This had been a place where Zelana's people had once come to embrace their emotions rather than suppress them. It was a relic of a time when feelings were seen as sacred rather than shameful. "Your people abandoned this?" Marcus asked, his voice soft with wonder as he studied the beautiful carvings. "But why? It's incredible." The pain that crossed Zelana's features was answer enough. Through halting gestures and shared emotional understanding, she managed to convey the story of her abandonment, how her empathic abilities had been seen as a flaw, how her people had evolved beyond emotion and left her behind when they evacuated their dying world. Naya felt tears streaming down her own cheeks as she experienced a shadow of Zelana's loneliness and rejection. "They left you here to die? Because you could feel too much?" Zelana nodded, then did something that surprised all of them. She approached Marcus and gently placed her hand over his heart. The gesture was intimate, but not sexual, more like a blessing or a recognition of something precious within him. Marcus didn't pull away. Instead, he covered her hand with his own, and Naya watched as understanding passed between them that went deeper than language or even empathy. It was a moment of pure connection between two souls who had both known abandonment. Marcus by the death of his parents in a transport accident when he was young. Zelana by her own people's rejection of her gifts. "We won't leave you, Marcus," said quietly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "Whatever happens, we won't abandon you the way they did." The transformation in Zelana was immediate and profound. The terrible loneliness that had surrounded her like a cloak seemed to lift, replaced by something Naya had never seen in her. Xenobiological studies. The birth of love across species barriers. As night fell and the temperature outside plummeted to lethal levels, the unlikely group huddled together in the warmth of the heart shrine. Zelana showed them how to use the bioluminescent fungi for light and shared the meager food supplies she had gathered. More importantly, she began to teach them about her world, its dangers, and its hidden beauties, its history and its secrets. But Naya noticed that it was Marcus who drew most of Zelana's attention. The alien woman would steal glances at him when she thought no one was looking, and whenever their eyes met, both of them seemed to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the shrine's crystals. "I think," Naya whispered to Joran, as they settled in for the night, "we've just witnessed the beginning of something extraordinary." Joran nodded, adjusting his glasses thoughtfully. "Love? Love," Naya confirmed. "But more than that. A connection that could bridge the gap between our species. If they can find a way to be together, it could change how both our peoples understand what it means to truly live." Outside, the wind howled across the frozen landscape, but inside the heart shrine, surrounded by the warm echoes of ancient love and the promise of something new, 5 beings from 2 different worlds discovered that the universe was far more beautiful and mysterious than any of them had ever dared to imagine.